Hello. So I'm here to introduce our first speaker, who is Lara Fowler. Professor Lara Fowler is an attorney and mediator who focuses on environmental and natural resource law, including water rights, water quality, flooding, tribal law, and Endangered Species Act issues. Prior to joining Penn State, she was an attorney at Gordon Thomas Honeywell, LLP, where she focused on mediation and dispute resolution of complex natural resource issues. Let's welcome Mrs. Fowler.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Lara Fowler, and you'll have to bear with me, I am a law professor here, so if I call on you, you can be advanced and forewarned. Wanted to give actually a little bit of framework. I am not coming at this from an advocacy perspective so much as a mediator or a facilitator perspective. I'll give you a little bit of background on why, but a few thoughts on sustainable community dialogue. I'm actually housed both in the law school as well as the Land and Water Building with the Sustainability Institute. Work near them, but have a joint position with the Penn State Institutes of Energy and Environment. We've been talking actually a lot about sustainable communication, sustainable dialogue on a lot of topics that relate to climate change. And how you actually have conversations about these really, really difficult issues. So I'm coming more from that perspective and how you can, if you will, organize a conversation for success on difficult topics. And I'll show you a little bit more. Where I'm coming from, just as a bit of an aside, particularly for the students, I actually got interested in water issues in high school. And through, as an undergrad, was able to do research projects that ultimately has led a number of years later to where I am now. So if you're wondering, does what you do as a student matter? Sure. So I have worked up and down the West Coast on a lot of really, really contentious issues. Who gets to store and use groundwater in the greater Los Angeles area? How do you fix flooding in Washington State, second largest river basin? Small food fight between Northern and Southern California over water supply and allocation. Lots of parties, lots of very difficult issues, lots of very angry people. Go. I went to law school with the idea of doing mediation and dispute resolution, with the idea that having a legal background would be really helpful, and have been blessed with being able to work on that. Here at Penn State, we moved here about 2 years ago, and have been involved with trying to think about some of these topics within the university. So basic framework that I think about when I'm dealing with disputes or dispute resolution is a three-piece of a triangle. What's the substance? What are the issues? People often really want to be talking about that, but they get tangled up in a couple other places. People in the relationships. I don't trust you, I'm not going to talk to you. We don't have a good relationship, we can't work with each other. And so they never get to talk to the substance because they don't trust the message. The other place people get hung up is on process. I don't like how we got there, I'm not going to even get to being able to talk about what I think is really, really important. So common characteristics, there's a great book, Carpenter and Kennedy wrote a book called Managing Public Disputes. Very readable. It's not written for lawyers at all, I promise. But it basically says, hey, if you're dealing with a public dispute, there's some really common characteristics. And a lot of the issues that are associated with climate change end up as a dispute. You have substantive questions, varying differences in expertise. Maybe financial, maybe regulatory, maybe technical. Broad range of issues, often without a lot of clarity. This is where we need scientists, but it's often hard for scientists to weigh in if there's a lot of polarization. Parties and relationships. You guys can read these, but network of interest is pretty complicated. There's new parties that come on and say, hey, I'm interested. Different forms of power. I spend a lot of time thinking about power. What is it? How do you change a power imbalance? Somebody feels really powerful because they have a lot of money. Somebody else feels less powerful. How do you balance that so you can actually have a conversation about tough stuff? Lack of continuing relationship. Somebody moves, people change jobs, the characters change, what do you do? How do you deal with really strongly held values and values that are sometimes shifting? Procedural. There's lots of different decision-making processes. Great, I work for a nonprofit, I have to go to a board of directors. That's different than saying, hey, I'm Penn State, what's my position as Penn State? You want to know a really, really difficult job? Just actually had a conversation last week with the Solicitor General of the United States. He has the job of going and arguing in front of the Supreme Court. He gets to figure out what the position of the United States is in front of the Supreme Court. And that may be representing the Department of Defense, the Department of Health. You know, you pick your range, and he has to decide what position is and go and argue it. finding an institutional perspective can be really, really hard. So if you're asking Penn State writ large to do something, know that that's actually a very significant challenge. Unequal accountability. Different things, you know, some people are beholden to voters, other people are beholden to a board of directors. Different kinds of power, again, different accountability and structure. And non-standard procedures. A lot of the work I've done, I've had to make up mediation processes to deal with some of the issues. This is a pretty complex graph. Again, I recommend the book for being able to look at this. But the basic gist of this is if you don't think about managing disputes, the more you deal, basically the conflict gets harder and harder to deal with. I can come back to this if you want, but thinking about how do you slow down conflict, how do you really engage in discussion, how do you get out of saying I'm right and you're wrong. I'm going to give you a very quick illustration. I want you to all think for a second what you think when I say the word cat. Just imagine a cat. Okay, who thought of Garfield? Anybody? I'm dating myself now. I personally thought of the cat that started yelling at me when I moved this morning and asking for dinner or breakfast. Each of you probably had a very different version of the same word in mind. And the reason I bring this up is you may think, all right, cat, how hard is that? Well, we all had a different vision of what we were thinking about. So when I'm working with parties in a dispute, I often say, really, please get curious, don't get mad. I didn't understand what you said. I'm not going to assume malintent. I'm going to assume I maybe don't understand where you're coming from. That you may have a very different and very valid frame of reference. But if I don't know what that is, it's a little hard for us to communicate. Defining the issues, what's really the issue? Not the position, but the interest behind it. Adding expertise, facilitating effective meetings, thinking about consensus. Consensus is a hard one. We can talk for a long time about that. I'm not going to. But success. You know, are parties satisfied, their interests are met? Is the outcome efficient, broadly defined? And have the relationships improved? So, notes on being a mediator or facilitator. Mediator is actually defined in law. I sometimes feel like I'm wearing a cloak of invisibility around me all the time. I've worked in processes where I can't tell you what the parties told me. It's protected and privileged. And you can read this as a Uniform Mediation Act. Mediation privilege. I can't be forced to testify in court for some of what I've worked on. Fine with me, don't want to testify in court, working with the parties on an informal or a formal basis. But a lot of these skills roll over to facilitation. And the skills look like this. Who are the parties? I got sent to Los Angeles. Here, go fix water in Los Angeles. All right, I've been to LA, it's big. How many people are there? I had to figure out who the parties were. How do you identify the issues that people are thinking about negotiating? How do you improve communication? I don't talk to that person, I don't trust them. How do you translate or reframe in ways that people can actually think about an issue and start to reach resolution? What are the interests? What are the options? Okay, reality. Great, you've got this great plan, it's going to cost $7 billion. Now what? How do you build trust? How do you legitimize an agreement and get people to agree to it? I'm going to give you a very quick case study. This is actually Interstate 5. If you're ever driven between Seattle and Portland, this is what it looked like in 2007. This is not what you want your interstate freeway to look like, nor is it what you want your community to look like. This is the Chehalis River Basin. This is Seattle, for those of you maybe who've ever been there. This is the basin down south. This is what it looked like in 1996, and in 2007, and again in 2009. This area has been some very, very serious floods. Go back. Basically, 4 floods of record, 1990, 1996, 2007, and 2009. This community was at war with each other on what to do about this. I got to serve as the facilitator for the local council that was put in charge of fixing this issue. And it was a very interesting process, and the reason I bring it up is a case study. So I worked with the community, and they went from being very, very polarized, can't even talk to each other, don't put me in the same room, public officials saying, give me dynamite, I'll blow up Mellon Street Bridge, that'll take care of the problem, to this. This is one of the little cities saying, hey, you know, we get that we're all in this together, and in order for us to find a solution, we all need to be working with each other. A lot of work went on between those two places. Give me dynamite, we'll take care of the problem, to this is a complex situation, we really need to work with each other. But if I have to step back from a lot of what I've done, floods, droughts, and everything in between, it's when you can actually communicate with each other and work through very, very difficult scientific, policy, economic questions that you can start to resolve some of these and gain forward traction. This was an area where people were like, do not make me get meetings in this place. Now they're like, wow, this is a national example of how to have really good conversations about really hard things. Excuse me. There's a really big role actually for a university in this. Ruggles House Center Public Policy is at University of Washington and Washington State. It's a marriage actually between those two universities. And they've been able to help facilitate the ongoing discussion, report, scientific work, and engagement on, again, this really difficult topic. So if I go back and say, okay, here's my basic framework for thinking about issues like this. Research, natural science, social science, decision sciences, training, convening discussions, and then helping translate are all really, really important skills for dealing with many of the issues that come up that are associated with climate change. So I think this is interesting. Eleanor Ostrom actually won a prize, major prize, Nobel Prize in Economics. One of the only women to have done so. She actually got her start looking at the same basin I worked on in Los Angeles. And her basic point was, hey, people are part of the equation, and if you can't figure out how to work with people, the technical side is really going to get you there. So I'm going to leave you with this quote. Happy to answer questions.
Do you have any sort of advice on how to really decipher what somebody is, like what their actual issue position on something is when they're using very inflammatory?
Sit down and have a cup of coffee. Yeah, I actually got to hear the Dalai Lama speak a number of years ago, and he gave a really interesting talk. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me is the governor of the state was interviewing him on stage in front of several thousand people. And she basically said, if you had one wish for world peace, what would it be? And he said, you know what, I would love to take the world leaders and their families, and I'd go out and I'd have a cup of coffee, or excuse me, I would go out basically and take them on vacation, 10 days. Maybe at the end of it, they can talk business, but not before. And his basic point is, I've seen it time and time again, is if you don't know where people are coming from at a very personal level, it's very hard to do anything on substance. If what you're giving somebody else's positions, I want fossil free, period, but without exploring some of the interests behind it, it's very hard to have a conversation that gets past that position and sort of, I'm not going to talk to you further. One of the things we did in the Chehalis, and again gave you that as a very brief case study, was we started taking the meetings out of the local courthouse where they'd always been to the grand cities of Seattle and Montesano and Cosmopolis. You've never heard of these cities, there's a reason why. They're tiny. But we take people on these little itty-bitty tours. They go out, start talking about their kids, start talking about fishing, their jobs, and by little, you could see the relationships building so that they could actually talk with each other about very hard things. Yeah?
Have there been any floods on I-5?
They were very perilously close this year, actually. Despite the fact that much of the West Coast is in incredible drought, this area was like inches away. But interestingly enough, they were able to start doing lots of baby projects. And so they were actually analyzing how their baby projects were doing. It actually made a big difference. Some of the areas they were able to clear out culverts. The 2007 flood that I showed you actually killed off most of the dairy birds in that area. It's a tough thing when you watch a fifth-generation dairy farmer in tears because he had to listen to his cows drown. So they built places for the cows to go. Simple things like that, but it started to also build the rhetoric of we can do this versus this is the Chehalis and all we ever do is fail. And so you could see that narrative of success actually coming through as people, and you can see in the quote from the city of Montesano saying we're all in this together, it made a huge difference. So they were this close, but it didn't flood. Other questions? All right, thank you for your time, and look forward to the rest of the